Alrighty, in this first lecture, what we're going to do is try to introduce you to the material that you'll find in the first chapter of your text, the introductory material that will introduce you to the nature of anthropological inquiry. We're then going to talk about anthropology and Christians, and then we're going to kind of summarize how this course might be important for you. So, what I would like to suggest is that we start out by asking that first question: what do anthropologists study? Now, it's a big field. There is a whole lot more to it than simply digging up bones. Inevitably, folk will ask me when they hear that I'm an anthropologist, dug up any good bones lately? Well, we do a lot more than bones. As a matter of fact, anthropology has 5 very distinct branches. And the first of those branches of anthropology is physical anthropology. Physical anthropologists are particularly concerned with issues of physiology. Physiology primarily of human beings, but they will also look at physiology of animals, physiology in plant life, a lot of other physical kinds of things. Physiological anthropologists are looking at an entire different body of data than any other group of anthropologists. For instance, your body is recording your whole history. What you've been eating, what you've been doing. If we came across, as anthropologists are wont to do, skeletons in a graveyard, several months ago, for instance, some folk were excavating in an old graveyard in Virginia and came across the grave sites of the first governor of the Virginia colony. Along with the governor was his wife, some other folk in the community, so they dug up the old bones and decided that they would try to do an analysis, as physical anthropologists do, of the bones of these people. So they cut open the leg bones and looked at the bone structure, the marrow structure that was inside of the bones of the first governor of the colony of Virginia. And they discovered that the first people had suffered real severe malnutrition problems. There was a scarcity of food. Folk had been going hungry. As a result, their bone deposits were showing deficits. There was calcium buildup. There were lack of certain kinds of things. You could trace the whole history of their dietary process by looking at the inside of their bone. It's sort of like what a biologist would do. In biology, you can cut down a tree, look at the rings, and you can see from the rings of a tree whether there's been a year of heavy rain or light rain. You can tell whether there was blight or disease during that year. You can tell from those rings the kinds of things that are happening. As a matter of fact, you can even trace back, as you develop a history of the region, when that tree first started to grow. You could tell how old it was, how many years it's been there. And the same thing is happening in your bodies. Your growth record is being recorded. Now, some of you women have long hair. Now, I don't know how fast women's hair grows. I know mine grows at enough of a rate that every couple of months I've got to go get a haircut, otherwise I begin to look kind of shaggy. But, I don't know, what have you got, about 18 inches of hair there? Well, how long does it take to grow 18 inches of hair? 6 months? More or less? More? All right. Let's say your parents are worried that you've been at Biola and you're eating all the starchy food they serve in the calf, and they're worried that you're not getting a proper balanced diet. We can alleviate their problems, their anxieties, quite handily by simply taking a snip of a lock of hair and running it under a spectroscope, one of our tests, and a very, very sophisticated, refined test. And we can figure out whether you've been eating a proper diet or not. You know, we can figure out whether you've had adequate nutrition, whether you're getting enough protein, enough calories. It's all recorded there in your hair. As a matter of fact, when we first came across this principle, there were a missionary couple that we served with, and they went home on furlough, and they had two very active twins. And in addition to having two very active twins, they were hyperactive twins. You know, talk about having a hyperactive child, that's bad enough, but they have twins that are hyperactive. So they had these hyperactive twins, and they, oh, poor mother, you know, can't somebody give me medication to calm these kids down, or else give me medication, you know, Valium or something, calm me down. But the doctor said, you know what, I think, you know, we're going to test something. So they took a sample of the children's hair and said, you know what, these kids have got cadmium poisoning. They've got elevated levels of cadmium in their blood. And they said, boy, how do we get cadmium in our diet? Well, they said, what kind of food you've been eating? So they went through all of the foods that they've been eating, including listing off the fact that being in a very remote region with limited access to food, that they had bought an awful lot of tinned foods, meats, and vegetables from the county seat where they were able to order food, and they had bought tinned meat that had been processed in a developing country where the standards for canning were not as high as they ought to be. And what had happened was some of the trace elements of chemicals from the tin had leaked into the meat, including this cadmium from the packaging. So their children were eating meat that had elevated cadmium levels. That was seeping into their blood, causing them to be hyperactive and you know, hardly controllable. So the doctor put them on some kind of medication, got the cadmium levels down to normal, and voila, they had two normal kids. Well, as normal as MKs can be. Any MKs here? Well, you know, as normal as MKs can be, because they're kind of a wild bunch anyway. And but they were at least normal kids, and they were able to find this by doing trace samples in the hair. Now, that's the kind of thing that physical anthropologists do. That it's the thing that they're famous for. Well, there are other things, of course, that they do. One of the physical anthropologists at the University of California in Santa Barbara, where I did my graduate work, his name was Phil Walker. Phil Walker was approached by the Santa Barbara Sheriff's Department one day and said, we need your help. Apparently several months earlier, a couple of kids were up in a picnic grounds with their parents, and they went running off into the scrub brush to play, and came running back, Mommy, Mommy, there's a skeleton up there. So parents went scrubbling up there into the bush, and sure enough, here was this skeleton down in the sagebrush. So they called out the Sheriff's Department. Sheriff's Department came up and gathered up the bones, and they'd been doing everything they could to try to find out the identity of this person. Weren't able to identify them, so they brought the bones then down to Phil Walker and said, could you help us identify this person? So Phil Walker, being a physical anthropologist, examined the bones very, very carefully, and on the basis of his first go-round, he came to several conclusions. He said, first of all, this is a young man, late 20s, early 30s. It is a Hispanic male, and he was able to give his height, his approximate build. And then he said, in addition, I can tell you that this individual was shot. And they said, how can you tell he's shot? Phil said, look, under these powerful microscopes, he found a chip on one of the ribs. Furthermore, he found another chip on the backside that would have indicated a bullet going through, chipping the rib, and coming out the back where it also chipped the rib. He said, if this person was shot in the place where you found the skeleton, if you go up and dig, in that point you will find the spent bullet. So Sheriff's Department went back up, found the place where the body had been located, dug down in, and sure enough, discovered the spent bullet. Well, his credibility went up with the Sheriff's Department in Santa Barbara. They said, well, can you give us any other clues as to his identity? Phil said, I will make a speculative guess. He said, I think this person was had spent some time in jail. He's a former convict. And they said, how can you tell that from his bones? They said, well, because I know jailhouse behavior. And guys who are in the pen and who spent a fair bit of time in there like to do bodybuilding. And so they're out there in the prison yard, and they're working their bodies with the weights. And the thing that convicts like to do, they like to kind of strut their stuff in the prison, you know. Pull their t-shirt off, stick it in their pocket, you know, strut their stuff and show off their muscles. And so they tend to work the upper portion of their body, and they're not really concerned about working the lower portion. Now, if you're a real bodybuilder, of course, you're going to work all the muscle groups. But he said this person has totally ignored the lower portion of their body. They've done everything to build up chest and arms in order to strut. Now, he could tell all of that by the manner in which the bones and the ligaments, or the muscles and the ligaments, all attached to the bone structure. And he had examined this. Well, they struggled some more. They were still unable to identify the person who was now the victim of this homicide. So they came back and said, we still haven't been able to identify him. Is there anything more you can do? He said, I can rebuild the face. On the basis of what we know about bone structure and the manner in which all of the muscles attach themselves to the skull, we can tell pretty much what he looked like in terms of how much fat, even how thick the lips are, how broad the nose. We can rebuild the face just by knowing how these tissues attach to the bone structure. So Phil rebuilt what this person would look like. He built the skull, he built the facial structure, the lips, the nose, and came up with a replica head model of this person and gave it to the department of the Sheriff's Department for them. So they took a picture of it, and they put the picture in the Santa Barbara News Press. See? They said, all right, have you seen this man? Well, the next day they got a telephone call. And this woman said, I saw my son's picture in the newspaper. What's he up to? Well, they said, when was the last time you saw your son? Oh, the woman said, I haven't seen him for months and months and months, a long time. And the Sheriff's Department said, well, isn't that kind of unusual that you haven't seen him and you haven't reported him missing or anything? And she said, well, to tell you the truth, you see, my son went to jail several years ago, and he was released on probation, and I think he may have violated his probation, so we just kind of assumed that he wasn't contacting us so that he wouldn't be able to be traced by the Sheriff's Department again and get thrown back into jail. And they said, well, your son's not going back to jail. We think your son is dead. And the picture that you have is our attempt to trace him. So now with a name and a history, they were able to go back. They were able to take some of the dental records based on his jaw, check it out against known dental records, and indeed they were able to identify who this homicide victim was. Now, these are the kinds of things that physical anthropologists do. Now, we are not going to study that kind of material. This is not a physical anthropology class. See? So I just tell you what it is that physical anthropologists do. Archaeology is another branch of anthropology. And of course the job of archaeology is to examine extinct cultures. Cultures that have long since passed out of existence. These are the folk, the Indiana Jones types, you know, who go around with a bullwhip in one hand and a beautiful woman in the other. Well, that's the stuff legends are made of. Most folk who are involved in archaeology are quite homely, humble, normal people who do an awful lot of hard work and sweat in very, very remote places of the world, trying to come up with some kind of an idea of what life might have been when people were not keeping written records. And indeed, some very fascinating kinds of things are being discovered. For instance, I believe it was last year that some bones were discovered along the riverbank of a river in northern Oregon, just south of the Washington border. And that wasn't unusual. Bones have been found in this region before. But the thing that was rather interesting was that these bones were not the bones of a traditional Native American. They were not the bones of an Indian. They were the bones of someone who was more Caucasian than Native American. And what made it particularly problematic was that these bones were found in a layer of sediment and well, along with other artifacts that would indicate that these bones were perhaps 10,000 years old. Well, now we got a real problem. Were there folk who were living in North America at the same time that Native Americans were living here, or perhaps even preceding them, who were not Native Americans but who were Caucasians? Did Native Americans really come to America first, or did Caucasians come here first? Well, this raises all kinds of interesting problems, interesting potential insights regarding life on this earth 10,000 years ago, but it raises political issues. You see, because all Native artifacts belong to Native Americans, and they're saying, give us these bones back. And the archaeologists are saying, wait a minute, they're not your people. And the Native Americans are saying, yes, they are. We want them back. And so this is a case that's gone all the way to the Supreme Court. Who do these bones belong to? Because they're loaded with political ramifications. And indeed, what we discovered is that Caucasians were wandering all around the globe 10,000 years ago. We have found sites in northern China of Caucasians, a very strong Caucasian culture in northern China. And the Chinese are not real super happy about this discovery because, you know, they kind of like exclusive claim to that territory. So it's a field that is rife with all kinds of political implications and yet fascinating material that will give us insights into what life was like. There is so much more that should be done and could be done, and archaeologists are assigned that task. Well, we're not going to be studying archaeology in this course because this is not a course in archaeological anthropology. Still, a third branch of anthropology is linguistic anthropology. And the linguistic anthropologists are that group of people who are looking at language, the distribution of language, the manner in which language borrows, travels, forms thinking, constitutes a part of the total concept of a people's perception of reality. And it's a very exciting kind of a field. For instance, the whole subject of tobacco. Tobacco was a New World product. Europeans had no idea that tobacco existed prior to 1492 when Columbus discovered the New World and was able to take tobacco back to the Old World. Now, that same tobacco, along with sweet potatoes and white potatoes and corn and a lot of other foods, were finally taken around the globe. So somewhere about 400 years ago, tobacco reached the island of New Guinea. Who knows how long it took to make its way from the coast into the highlands, but in 1957, when the first outsiders reached the interior of the highlands of New Guinea, they found tobacco plants growing there. And the people who were living there, when they were asked, what is that? They said, oh, that's tabo. See, tabo, the local name for tobacco. See? Now here is a linguistic connection, see, that excites linguistic anthropologists. See, how does language travel? How does culture impact other culture? And linguistic anthropologists look into these kinds of information. There is also the whole field of applied anthropology. And in applied anthropology, the goal of the applied anthropology is to find some kind of useful application. Now, in my graduate studies program, when I was struggling to make my way through grad school, I worked for a corporation that wanted to know how to sell luxury cars. And as part of that technique of selling luxury cars, my job was to sit in the showrooms of a Mercedes-Benz dealer and a BMW dealer and find out the kinds of things that people wanted to know about their cars so that they could make their advertisement targeted to the things that people were looking for. Now that's a useful application to anthropology. Again, we're not studying applied anthropology, we are studying cultural anthropology. And cultural anthropology is the study of living cultures. That's what this course is all about. That's what we are committed to doing, and that's what we'll be doing for the next 14 weeks. All right? Let's stop and take a break at this point. All right, for this second session now, what we want to do is look at the components that are part of the study of cultural anthropology. And what I have indicated on the overhead here is that one of the key components of the study of living cultures is the analysis of patterns of behavior. And those patterns of behavior will fall into several cultural institutions, and we're going to be looking at 7 of those during the course of our study together. We're going to be looking at economic systems, kinship systems, political systems, social systems, marriage systems, religious systems, production systems, and of course all of those are going to be revolving around the core that we have put here and have labeled that as worldview. Now, if you wanted a whole overview of the semester, this chart demonstrates it to you. Each one of those 7 institutions will have various components that are important to those particular institutions. For instance, when we talk about production systems, we're going to look at foraging cultures, we're going to look at slash and burn cultures, we're going to look at farming cultures, we're going to look at pastoral cultures. These are various means by which people produce the food and goods that they need. If we're going to look at the religious systems, we're going to look at individualism, shamanism, communalism, and ecclesiastical systems. So that each one of these components are going to be taken apart and examined in terms of manner in which people have sought to adapt their life ways. But we look at more than patterns of behavior. We look at more than cultural institutions. We also have to look at the ideas that are part of culture. And those ideas will be formulated in worldviews. They will be expressed in values. And these will be items that we'll take up for discussion tonight, but it will also carry through for many of our discussions throughout the semester. We're also going to be looking at the matter of relationships, the manner in which behavior and environment play out in some kind of relationship. People who live in the tropical zones. How does living in the tropics affect their lifestyle in contrast to people who live in more temperate climates or who live in Northern Europe? The English used to have a marvelous saying, only mad dogs and Englishmen go out in the midday sun. A phrase that was coined as a result of the colonial experience in India, when Englishmen discovered that they could not maintain the same pace of life in tropical India as they could in England. Well, these are the components that we're going to be looking at, but before we actually engage in our study, let's take a quick look at how, as Christians, we will bring a special dynamic to the study of culture. And so I want to ask the question, why should Christians study anthropology? And there are several ways in which we can answer that question. We can answer it, first of all, because God speaks through culture. And as Marshall McLuhan has said, the medium is the message. And if the medium is culture, if we're going to understand what God is saying to us, we have to understand culture. It's an important component in God's special revelation to us regarding who He is and how we should obey Him. And indeed, that's the second point. We have to obey God in culture. What does it mean when Jesus Christ tells us that we are to love our wives as Christ loved the church? See, what does that mean for you here in an urban Southern California environment? And what does it mean to a Dani tribal person sitting on the dirt, wearing nothing but a gourd, next to his wife, wearing nothing but a grass skirt? What does it mean to live in obedience to the New Testament, to love your wife and to give yourself to them as Christ gave Himself to the church? We need to understand culture in order to apply that. We need to understand the fact that God's eternal word stands in marked contrast to changing nature of culture. Cultures are fairly flexible, sometimes relative, changing over the years. God's word never changing, and yet, what is the relationship between them? We also are reminded of the fact that there is such a thing as the incarnational principle. The Apostle Paul said, I want to become all things to all people in order that I might win some to Christ. What does it mean to become all things to all people? Can we truly become a Dani? Can we truly become somebody from another culture? To what extent can we shed our old culture and take on a new culture? And these are issues that we will have to look at, but we must first of all understand culture. We also want to speak about the unity of the body of Christ. To what extent does being in the body of Christ allow us a plurality of cultures or a variety of lifestyles? To what extent is multiculturalism an appropriate vehicle for being one in Jesus Christ? Again, it is a study of culture that is going to help us. We also must be aware that God has established certain kinds of commandments for us. He has told us to go out into the world and to make it fruitful, to multiply, to subdue, to make it a marvelous place to live. And what humanity has discovered is that we function best in the fulfillment of God's creation commandments when we work in community and in a culture of shared existence and shared meaning. And so culture becomes one of the means by which we live in fulfillment of God's creation principles. Well, in this course, we're going to have to look at the research techniques of the cultural anthropologists. We're going to have to look at the patterns of behavior that are typical of cultures. We're also going to have to look at the manner in which people will bring different kinds of answers to the same kinds of problems. For instance, all of us have to feed ourselves through eating, but not all of us eat the same. Some folk will eat twice a day. Others will eat 3 or 4 times a day. Some will eat their main meal in the heat of the day. Others will eat it late in the day. There are different ways of solving the same problems for nutrition. Same way with clothing and other areas in which we seek to solve the issues of productivity and survival. We'll also want to look at how a Christian worldview impacts our understanding of culture. You see, as Christians, we do have a view of what it means to live with meaning and purpose and obedience to Jesus Christ. So we do bring a very special worldview, and we'll be bringing that to our study of culture. We also must understand that culture impacts the manner in which we understand culture, or understand the Bible, I'm sorry. So culture impacts our understanding of the Bible. The Bible helps us to understand culture. There is an interrelationship here. And as we look at that interrelationship, we will come to a much better understanding of who we are as believers. We will become literally world-class Christians. So that's the goal that's set before us. And we have got 14 weeks to bring us through all of it. And as we approach this, what we want to do in the time that's remaining to us yet tonight is to look at the whole question of worldview. Now, in the time that's before us, we want to look at what we mean by worldview, how worldview impacts culture and space, culture and time, culture and reality, culture and truth, culture and values, and then we'll draw a brief conclusion. And so those will be the kinds of topics that are before us. Now, as I reminded you earlier, we have this little chart. It's a survey of our entire course. We're looking at the very heart of that, the worldview component. The other institutions will be in a very definite relationship with it. Now, what does worldview do? Every person, whatever culture they live in, are given to asking four essential questions regarding themselves. The first question that they will ask is, who am I? Now, it's not a question that they just, little 3-year-olds, who am I? But it is a question which they are formulating, who am I? And the second question that they will be asking is, who are you? It's the kind of thing that infants begin to explore even as they're lying in the crib and they are looking at their hands. And is that me or is that somebody that's not me? And as they are discovering what is them and who it is that are near us, children learn very quickly who mother is, who father is, who the caring individuals are in their existence. And then they reach out beyond this to what is everything else. Everything else that comes into their senses. The idea of what it is that's impacting our skin, the feelings of heat or of cold, or of comfort or of discomfort. There's a marvelous story, the story of Helen Keller, who is blind and who is deaf. And she has no way of relating to the world except through touch. And she was a totally wild individual. There was no way to reach her. And her parents finally hired this a very marvelous young woman to come and be her helper. And the woman started to write onto her hand. And they finally found a medium by which she could, through touch, discover what things were. And as soon as she was able to discover who she was, who other people were, what everything else was, life all of a sudden began to open up for her. And it's a marvelous story of how these questions are important in establishing our sense of identity and our perception of the world. And then, of course, we have to ask the fourth question: how do we all relate to each other? Now, these four foundational questions are universal to all peoples. And they begin the process of establishing for us what we call a worldview. And I would define a worldview as those underlying assumptions that people make regarding the nature of the world in which they live. Now, because they are underlying assumptions, we hardly ever stop to think about them. They are usually the things that we take for granted as being the nature of reality. And they help us to establish who we are in relationship to the rest of the world. Now, worldview becomes the foundation then for our knowledge systems. They become the foundation for our values. They become the foundation for our patterns of behavior. And they also become the basis for all of our aesthetic creativity. The manner in which we will go about engaging in art or architecture. Whether we see flowers as beautiful or not. Our aesthetic perceptions are formed by our worldview. But perhaps the most important is that our worldview establishes meaning and purpose in our lives. If we are convinced, for instance, that we are nothing but animals, then we can justify acting like animals as being simply part of our human nature. But if we are convinced in our worldview that we are different than the animal kingdom, then we simply cannot condone animal-like behavior. And this will have a powerful impact, for instance, on whether we are sexually promiscuous, see, or whether we ascribe dignity to other human beings when we see each other as being created in the image of God. Well, what are some of the components of worldview? And we want to talk about these components. One of the components that are a part of worldview is an attitude towards space. Space, the manner in which we conceptualize distances, will be informed by our worldview assumptions. Now, in a Western worldview, we have an orientation towards space that goes something like north, south, east, and west. Now, when we have this four-dimensional orientation towards space, we think in terms of north as being where on a map? Always at the top. So we put north at the top of the map. So south, of course, becomes the bottom of the map, and all maps have to be drawn with north at the top, or else you have to put a special little thing in it that says north this direction, as for instance, if you look at a map of the campus. See, it's kind of skewed north off to the left side of the page, and there's this great big thing that says north is this way so that people won't get mixed up. Well, north is always at the top. Well, do you know what that does? You have been taught since childhood that north is at the top. That affects the whole manner in which you conceptualize geography and space. For instance, if I'm going to travel to San Francisco, what do I say? I'm going to travel, what do I say? I'm traveling up to San Francisco. So, if I'm going to go to San Diego, I'm going to travel down to San Diego. But wait a minute. San Diego, Los Angeles, and San Francisco are all on the coast. They're all at the same altitude, sea level. So where do we get this travel up to San Francisco, down to San Diego? See? It's this map type orientation where north is always up, so therefore we travel up to San Francisco, we travel down to San Diego. Well, what if I want to go to, I want to go east to Palm Springs? How do I get to Palm Springs from Los Angeles? I'm not going to go up. I'm not going to go down.
Over.
How am I going to get there? I'm going out to Palm Springs. Oh. Well, here we are in La Mirada, and I'm going to go to Los Angeles. It's only 20 miles away. How do I get to Los Angeles from here? I go up, no, down, out to, no, into. I'm going to go into Los Angeles. I'm going to go into Los Angeles. I'm going to go out to Palm Desert or Palm Springs. Where do we get this in and out business? Which is more in and which is more out? Again, our sense of geography has been inspired by maps. And in maps, you always have urban centers that are marked with a big circle, and everything is into the urban centers or out from the urban centers. And so this in and out concept, again, has affected our language so that we can't even talk without having a inner map of what it means to create space. Now, not everybody does this. You see, the tribal folk that I worked with, they didn't have maps. They didn't travel up and down unless they were going to go up a mountain or down a mountain. So everything in their worldview, when it came to space, was described in terms of the flow of water. So you went upriver, or you went downriver, or you stayed on this side of the river, or you crossed the river. Everything was mapped according to rivers. Where are you going? I'm going to the Gurari River. Oh, okay. Whereabouts on the Gurari River? I'm going upriver and across on the other side. Oh, I know exactly where you're going. See? Oh, no, I'm going to go to the Maple Luke Valley. Oh, really? Whereabouts? This side of the Maple Luke River. Oh, yes. Down or up? I'm going down to the mouth, or I'm going up to the source. See? And everybody knows exactly where it is because everything is oriented by rivers. Now, that makes sense to them. See? But it also creates a manner in which they have to think. How do you go to the coast? Well, you see, the only way they can get to the coast is not to follow the rivers down because that's too far away. They have to get in an airplane. They have to fly up valley, and then they pop over the mountain, and then they shoot out to the coast. So as far as they were concerned, to go to the coast, you had to go up river, not down river, see? Because that's the direction that the airplane would go to get to the coast. Well, this was part of their whole particular worldview. Now, we also have, in addition to geographical space, we have cultural space. And there's a whole series of studies that have been done on cultural space. Personal space that involves talking to one another, but also cultural space. For instance, we lived with a group of people who were very egalitarian, and their houses were built in circles. Circular patterned villages is very typical of egalitarian villages. See, but hierarchical villages tend to be built in straight lines, with the most important people living either at the very start or in the very middle. See, and so you have hierarchical spacing of villages, or you have egalitarian. People's concepts, see, are influenced by their worldview. Well, then you also have time as a part of worldview. It's one of those underlying assumptions about the nature of reality. Now, we conceptualize time in the Western world in a linear manner. We think of past, we think of present, we think of future. See? And so we can talk about increments of time in the past. We can mark it off according to years. As a matter of fact, we've marked off time according to months, days, weeks, years, centuries. We've broken that down into hours, minutes, seconds. Now, whoever came up with this 60 minutes to an hour, 24 hours to a day, 60 seconds to a minute. Anybody know the origins of time? Know who came up with it? It goes way back to the Babylonians. They created this really kind of awkward system of 60s. Wouldn't it have been a whole lot wiser to come up with increments of 10? See, there's 10 hours in a day, 100 minutes in an hour, 100 seconds in a minute. That way, you could count on your hands and fingers, or even 10, 10, and 10, And we'd break down time differently. See, would that be logical? Well, we could have done it that way. As a matter of fact, not all of us have the same calendars. I mean, we just celebrated Chinese New Year. We're in the year of the tiger right now. But if you were an Aztec, see, we'd be in a whole different calendar. Anybody here know how to read the Aztec calendar? Very, very complicated. See, but they had their own calendar. So people have come up with different ways to measure time. And indeed, this tribal people that we served with, they had a different way of marking time. Time was marked by modes of action. So you didn't have just the past, present, and future. You had what activity is going on now, what activity was just completed, and activity that was quite a while ago. See? And then you have action which I'm thinking about doing, but I haven't quite got to it yet, but I want to do it. And then you have action that is kind of way off in the future. And so you actually had 7 time periods in Donnie culture, which had to be indicated by, not by time, nice clear-cut time divisions, but by how significant they were to the present person and the actions that they were involved in. We also marked the days by modes of action. See, the night was marked by the time when we stoke up the fire to go to sleep. See, the time when we woke up cold and had to stoke the fire again. See, the time when we built up the fire to get breakfast ready. See, so there were three times during the night, and then the time when we would hear the morning swallows. The time when the dew on the grass would dry in the sun. The time when the sun was in the height of the sky and it was hot. The time in the afternoon when the evening swallows would return. Yeah. Every day, every significant part of the day was marked by some kind of significant activity to people's lives. Now that was quite satisfactory for them. They didn't need to break it down to hours, minutes. They broke it down by their activities. Well, there's more than one way to tell time. There's also what we call myth time. Myth time is a different way of telling time. See, in myth time, we don't go by the normal revolutions of the sun. We go through periods of unmarked time. And interesting kinds of things can happen. The physical world and the spiritual world can interact in very, very significant ways. And as if that isn't enough, we can have still a third way of marking time, and that is dream time. See, dream time. What is dream time? Well, dream time is, if you've had a dream. I happen to have a lot of dreams last night. I don't know why. Last night was a heavy dream night. I woke up exhausted from all the things I was doing in my dreams. But how long does it take to dream a dream? Dream time is entirely different. You can do an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours worth of work in a few seconds. in a dream. See, dream time is a very different kind of time. It's a different way to experience reality. And there are some folk, like the Australian Aborigines, who talk about getting into dream time, when the normal boundaries of time begin to fade away. And this raises some very interesting kinds of things. It's sort of like C.S. Lewis's Entering Narnia. See, when you leave behind the time of this world and you enter into the time of another place. Well, that's part of our whole worldview assumption. But there are other things that we must look at in addition to these aspects of a worldview. We want to know what is reality. And this is probably the most important thing for us, because as we look at reality, we have to ask ourselves, what is real in this world? We can embrace the philosophy of Carl Sagan, who says, there is the universe, and there is nothing else, never was, never will be. The only thing that exists is what we see. Well, we might want to differ with Carl Sagan. We might come up with a different worldview regarding what is reality. And I'd like to explore some of these concepts in the time ahead of us. And I would like to talk about 4 different worldviews. I would like to address, first of all, what I call a secular humanist worldview. We could call this a naturalist worldview. I'm not particularly wed to the idea of a secular humanism, but I particularly like it. And if you like naturalism, that's fine too. But in a naturalistic or secular humanist worldview, the world consists of everything that we can see, man and nature and the physical universe. There is very little room for God in that universe. Now, they don't particularly exclude God. If you exclude God, you're an atheist. Most secular humanists or naturalists aren't ready to go that far because they have not been able to conclusively prove that God doesn't exist. So they take the point of view, if God exists, he is largely irrelevant to my way of life. I don't particularly need God in my life. As a matter of fact, I have serious doubts that he does exist. If he does, if he ever comes in the neighborhood, I'd love to have him stop by. We'll have a cup of coffee, we'll get acquainted, and I will, believe in him. But in the meantime, we give a very small place for God in a secular humanist worldview. In contrast to the secular humanist worldview, there is what I would call a sacral worldview. And in a sacral worldview, there is an added component to the 2-tier system of the secular humanists. In the sacral worldview, there is a place for God. Not a very big place, but there is a place for God. This God is fairly distant. This type of worldview would be typically what you would find in a place like Africa, for instance. Africa, south of the Sahara, there is a belief in God, but he is a distant God, he is a hostile God, he is not concerned with human life. Rather, those parts of the spiritual world that do have a major influence on us is the world of the spirits, of the ghosts, and of the demons. And so they see that there is a world out there filled with spirit beings who have a major impact on man and nature, which, as you see, does have a part of their worldview. They recognize that there are certain things that are real about life. They know how to plant crops, when those crops will do well and when they won't do well. But there are certain things that they cannot predict. When blight will come, when the drought will come, when there will be a flood. Those things are under the control of the spirits and the ghosts and the demons. And so they will have to pray to them as well. Now, that's an entirely different worldview. So where do we as Christians stand? Well, we could look at a biblical worldview. a biblical worldview would have a large place for God and the Trinity. We're going to have the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. We're going to give him a major role in our worldview. We are going to have a major role for man and nature. And in the middle, we are going to make room for the existence of a devil, of demons, and of angels. Now, you do believe in a devil, don't you?
Yes.
You do believe in angels, don't you?
Yes.
Are there any angels in this room?
Maybe.
Well, I hope so, because angels have been sent, see, to watch over the saints. I would like to think there's a few in here. Well, we've got this as a biblical worldview. The Bible presents a very definite set of teachings regarding the reality of the existence of Satan, of angels, and of demons. Now, let's go to still a fourth worldview. And I'm calling this the American Christian worldview. Once again, we've got a place for God, particularly the Trinity. We've got a place for man and nature, but do you notice something that's happened between the American Christian worldview and the biblical worldview? At least as I've drawn it here on the chart, I have made man and nature far larger, and I've squeezed up Satan and angels and demons because most Americans are not really convinced that there are angels running around. We really don't expect angels to be in the room here with us. We really aren't anticipating demons behind the bushes behind me. See? There might be demons out there in Africa, you know. I mean, come on, they do weird things out there, and they probably got a lot of demons out there. But here in America, no, we don't have any demons running around. La Mirada, especially Biola. I mean, come on, this place has been sanctified, see. So we tend to diminish the concept that we are under the influence of demons or of angels. And Satan, we tend to take a fairly trivial view towards Satan, you know. We sing happy little songs about how we're going to stomp him into the ground, we're going to bash him in the head, you know, we're not afraid of him. And we sing these cutesy little songs as if he is totally defeated and is not a real enemy that goes about like a roaring lion to destroy us. Now, I've drawn just one chart for American Christianity. Actually, this will vary very dramatically. You see, there are some Christians who have been so influenced by the secular humanist perspective that they don't have any room for Satan, for demons, or for angels. Or if they are, they're so small that we can totally ignore them. And there are some, particularly in a Pentecostal tradition, who tend to give so much credibility to the existence of Satan and the devil that everything happens according to demonic things. You know, the microphone fails to work and we want to cast the demon out of the microphone. See? The PowerPoint fails and we start praying over the machine. See. Well, now, I don't want to ridicule this kind of an approach, but it seems to me that we can err very dramatically by imbalanced attitudes regarding what is reality. Now, this is important. See, this is important, and it's important for several reasons. If you come down sick, you've got this raging fever, your head feels like it's going to absolutely explode and fall off. Matter of fact, you wish it would. See? What are you going to do to get better? Is it time to pray and cast out a demon? Or rebuke Satan for bringing the headache on? Or is it time to sit down and take a Tylenol? Or should you do both? Your worldview will determine how you respond to sickness, to temptation, to the events of your life, and how you carry out your ministry. So, worldview will determine the manner in which we look out at the world round about us. And then we seek to relate to that world. And worldview will be constantly being transformed as we are in the study of the Word, as we are in the study of nature, as we are in study of the sciences, and as we discover more and more about ourselves. So, worldview, it's critical. It's critical for us to understand what it is and to understand how it impacts our understanding of truth. Well, we need to move on. We need to move on to the whole question of culture and truth. And I want to raise a nice Ph.D. level word, epistemology. See, epistemology. What is epistemology? Epistemology is the study of how do we know what we know. It's a study of knowledge. See? So epistemology asks the question, how do we know what we know? And there are several ways that we can approach the search for truth. We can begin, first of all, through scientific testing or experimentation, using the old scientific methodology. This is great for looking at the physical laws of the universe, for establishing what the physical laws of the universe are. We use scientific methods. We'll use those in the study of humanity. We will apply certain kinds of scientific laws for social science studies. But that's not the only way that we can know truth. We can also know truth through divine revelation. See? Frankly, this is the only way that we can know God. God has to reveal himself to us. And God has chosen to reveal himself to us. And he has chosen to reveal himself to us by appearing to selected individuals through the person of Jesus Christ. And he has manifest to us who God is and what he wants us to know about him. Now, there are a lot of things that we wonder sometimes about that self-revelation. There's a lot of things that we wish we knew more. But God has made himself known to us. And so revelation becomes an important path to truth. There is still a third approach, and that third approach is what we might call transcendental illumination or existentialism. And Christians get real nervous when we start talking about transcendental illumination or existentialism. You know, oh, you can't trust experience. And indeed, there are only certain kinds of things that we can learn about the nature of reality through existentialism, through transcendental illumination. But, you know, sometimes you can get just a marvelous inspiration. Lights go on, and all of a sudden you see truth and concepts that you would never have been able to get before. And when those come, they can come either through meditation, they can come through a period of quiet reflection, they can come in a variety of ways. But when they come, all of a sudden your life is forever transformed. And it can happen when you are under severe pain, and all of a sudden you begin to see life in a fresh perspective, or when pain ceases. It can happen when you are under drugs, and all of a sudden you begin to take a whole new outlook on life. Now, we have to test these. And one of the things that we want to talk about is the fact that in the search for truth, somehow or another we have to balance out these insights, these experiences, the scientific methodology, and God's self-revelation. And when we put these all together, we discover that we have a series of guiding lights that can help us to understand what life is truly like. What is indeed real? Well, culture also needs to look at the whole question of values. When we put worldview and epistemology together, when we put religion together, we come up with a series of value statements. These value statements then become patterns of behavior, which become standards for our culture. And these are then operationalized through a series of cultural practices that we call manners. These are the shoulds and the oughts of life. You should take a bath every day. See? Where do we get this from? Well, we get this from a series of personal experiences regarding what happens if you don't take a bath. You start itching, scratching, getting bugs and things on you, sores. And so out of experience, we discover that bathing every day is good for us. We also discover from looking in microscopes that bacteria build on the skin, and so we could put it to test. And on it goes. So we establish certain kinds of values regarding the need to take baths every day. We make this a standard of behavior, and all of a sudden everybody's doing it. And we make them, see, required. We begin to offer rewards and punishments, see. You don't want to take your bath today? You're going to get a spanking, see. So we send the little kids into the bathtub under the fear of pain and torture for not wanting to take a bath. But these become then the basis for right and wrong. And also, knowledge. What is truth? See, these become the basis then for establishing not only right and wrong, but truth and error. Well, all of this leads us then to some very interesting kinds of implications. We have to ask the question, is truth and knowledge relative? See, is there a something that is true in one culture but not true in another? Is knowledge in one culture closer to truth than others? And if so, how can we tell? Is it okay to go to Rome and be as the Romans do? To go to China and be as the Chinese? What are the limits of our knowledge? Is worldview a good thing or a bad thing? What makes a good worldview or a bad worldview? And frankly, that raises some very, very serious philosophical questions. We're not going to be able to answer those. The philosophers have sought for hundreds of years to try to ascertain truth, to try to ascertain what is appropriate. Even Pilate stood before Jesus and said, "What is truth?" And this is an age-old question, and we're going to be struggling our way through some of these here in this class. We have to ask also, what is a Christian worldview? What is a Christian worldview? Is there such a thing as a Christian worldview? And I believe there is. But I might say, as we look at this whole question of what is a worldview, what is a Christian worldview, while we may not come up with a nice, unified concept of what is a worldview that says everybody must have this very narrow, boxed-in worldview, I can say this, that part of the component that will go into our search for what constitutes Christian worldview is we will have to acknowledge that we only know in part. 1 Corinthians 13:9 tells us that we do not know everything. We only see through a glass darkly. And we must always keep in mind that we do not know all truth. And this ought to lead us to still a second conclusion regarding a Christian view, and that is we must be humble. We don't know everything, therefore we ought to act as if we do know everything. And you know, sometimes Christians can be very obnoxious because we're convinced that we've got truth, that we've got the Bible. Bible says it, therefore I believe it, and you're wrong if you don't believe my Bible. And that's not reflecting a very good humility, especially considering the fact that our perception of the Bible may be slightly skewed. So it always pays to be humble. And along with being a good dose of humility is a good dose of love for people who have different perspectives than we do. And this leads us then to the realization that we need to be open to growth. After all, if all truth is God's truth, what are we to fear from different perspectives? What do we have to fear from other discoveries that people might bring to us? See, we don't need to be afraid of what the scientific world is going to bring out, because, well, they may have a wrong application of it, and while they may have a wrong understanding of it, if we take that truth and process it in the light of the rest of truth, we should come up with a better understanding of the nature of the world in which God has placed us, and lead us then into a better understanding of who God is. So we must trust Christ. He did say that he sent his Spirit to give us knowledge and to give us wisdom. He's not going to lead us into error. We have the opportunity, see, of going to the fount of all knowledge and asking the Holy Spirit, see, to open us up so that we can see truth and we can discover it. And if we have these attitudes of humility, see, and of openness and of a keen desire to know truth, God will lead us into truth, and that truth will lead us back to God. One of the exciting things that we're planning on doing here on this campus next year is inviting a group of Christian scholars to engage in a dialogue. There'll be at least 12 of them, and we'll be looking at the anthropological theories of culture. And we're looking forward to a marvelous time of taking all of the humanistic explanations of culture and trying to come up, trying to evaluate them, to look at them and to say, now listen, as Christians, what are the implications of what they have discovered in light of what we evangelicals believe as we take the Word of God seriously? And we expect that out of all of this will come a far better understanding of what cultures are like. So, worldview. Worldview is foundational to understanding of truth. And we're going to be looking at this in much more detail as we move through, because this is an important component of our total course. And we're going to challenge your worldview assumptions, particularly the values that emerge out of this, because this is such an integral part of what anthropology is all about. But that's for a later lecture. We are at the end of our time together. I trust that you have been inspired to go out and to read your text, to come next week with your reading done. And next week, what are we going to pile into? Next week, we're going to get into cultural relativity. Oh, that's the nasty one. We're going to struggle with our way through that one. But you'll enjoy it. It's a marvelous time. And we'll try to work our way through what it means to be created in the image of God. Thank you. You are dismissed.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.